Well, shalom, dear friends, and welcome to our Genesis Bible study. Today we're going to be in chapter 42 of this great and expansive book of the Bible. I think we'll jump right into it today and begin with our preliminary PowerPoint material, as I've done in most of these Bible studies in Genesis. For those of you who are tuning into this video and you want to get right to the text of Genesis 42, I just encourage you at this point to fast forward through the PowerPoint material until you come to the Bible software. And then you can meet us there and we will begin with verse 1 of Genesis 42. The only difference I've made to this background material is I have a slide right at the end that discusses heaven and earth and the underworld and things like that. The last word of Genesis 42 is the Hebrew word Sheol, which is wrongly translated in the New King James Version, which is my go-to version for these Bible studies. It's wrongly translated as the grave. So if you're interested in this subject of kind of life after death, the place where God lives, the place of the afterlife, you may want to stick with us through the preliminary material. So let's dive right in. Recently, I published a book called Nazarene Essene Theology. This is basically a systematic theology from the perspective of the Nazarene Essene sects of Judaism, that is, like as opposed to the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the Herodians and whatever other kinds of sects or denominations we would call them these days there were in biblical times. And I'm recommending this book not only because I want to sell these books, but also because there's a tremendous amount of material in this book that's drawn from the book of Genesis, interpretations of those key passages. So this book is available to you on Amazon, maybe a few other booksellers as well, but the easiest place to get it is Amazon. Throughout the book of Genesis, we've been using a set of dispensational charts by Alfred Eade, is the theologian and artist. This is the fifth study, and I forget how many there are, something like 10 or 11, maybe 12 of these charts. This is the one that's called the Age of Promise. Of course, God makes promises in all the ages of biblical history, but it's the main focus of this one. It's in this age that the Bible tells us that Avram believed God and it was credited to him as righteousness. And anybody that has ever been saved by God has been saved according to this paradigm of belief being reckoned to him as righteousness, as a person being saved and qualifying for God's eternal kingdom. We would, in the New Testament, from a New Testament perspective, we would call that justification by God's grace through faith in Yeshua, Jesus. So here we have the three first generations of the patriarchs: Avram, whose name is changed to Avraham, father of many nations. Yitzhak is the second generation. Then we have Yaakov, whose name is changed to Israel. And later, the country, the nation, will be named after him. Here are the 12 sons of Israel. You'll notice that the red ribbon of salvation runs through the tribe of Yehuda. It's the tribe that produced the kings of Israel, and it's the tribe that produced the Messiah of Israel, Yeshua. We know him in English as Jesus. So, yeah, this Age of the Patriarchs extends to the captivity in Egypt, which has already begun with Yosef being sold into slavery by his own brothers. Later, spoiler alert, the remainder of the Hebrew nation, the chosen people of God, will be in captivity in Egypt. Not 400 years or not 430 years, but 215 years in Egypt. The other 215 of the 430 years were spent in the land of Canaan, which is where all four of the generations developed. Then there's 4 generations afterwards in Egypt. I have this map of the travels of Abraham just to illustrate the extent of the promised land. In Genesis 13 and Genesis 15, it's described in 2 different contexts, but geographically, the boundaries of the promised land are from the river of Egypt on the west to the great river Euphrates on the north and east. It's a territory that's never been completely occupied by the Hebrews, the Israelites, the Israelis, never have completely possessed all the promised land. I think that remains for the millennial kingdom, the messianic kingdom. We have the family tree of Abraham, beginning with his father, Terah, and his three, there were 3 sons, his 2 brothers, Haran and Nahor, and here's Avram in all caps, because he's the main character. And then the 3 generations, Avram, first generation, Yitzhak, second, Yaakov, third. We also have the nations that developed out of this family tree. Of course, the Moabites and the Ammonites come from Avram's brother Haran, mainly through his nephew Lot. Then we have the Israelites, of course, that are a main focus of our Old and New Testaments. We got the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, and the Ishmaelites, the descendants of Ishmael. And this fulfills the prophecy that God has made Abraham the father of many nations. And this chart doesn't even include all of them, because after Sarah's death, Abraham married again a gal named Keturah, and she would be the mother of many of the Arab tribes. Then we have Yaakov and his marriage to Leah and Rachel. These would be the first-class wives. And then each of those girls, Leah had a servant named Zilpah. She bore children to Abraham, Gad and Asher, their names. And Rachel also had a servant named Bilhah. She gave birth to Dan and Naphtali. And I think this was the one that Reuben slept with and kind of discredited himself in his father's eyes. And so he did not receive the kind of the double portion of the eldest that would have been coming to him as the eldest son. Here we have the travels of Yosef. The purple lines just take place, I think, in chapter 37, probably, where he's looking for his brothers as they're out taking care of the sheep. He finds them in Dothan, and then the green arrow is the path that the Midianite, Ishmaelite traders took to take Yosef to Egypt. And here, according to this map, it has Yosef's destination at the city of Avaris, which may be the place where he did go, but there are some other candidates as well, including On or Heliopolis, the city of the sun. The girl that Yosef married was the daughter of the priest of On, the city of On or Heliopolis. So he may have been taken there. He may have been taken to Noph, which is modern day Memphis in Greek. Okay. This is the last slide that I mentioned to you before. And the reason I even have this slide here is to give you kind of a perspective on, of course, the material world that we live in, but also the spiritual realm, which is around us and above us, I guess we would say. And then there's a nice diagram of Sheol, which is called the underworld. So since the word Sheol is going to be the topic of the last word in this chapter, and only so because it's wrongly translated as the grave in the New King James version. I want to distinguish between those two. The Hebrew word Sheol is the equivalent to the Greek word Hades, or the English word hell. So it is the underworld. It is the the repository, the kind of the temporary destination of people who lived in the Old Testament, believers and unbelievers alike. And so I want to kind of break this down and talk a little bit about it. According on this chart, and this chart is by Tim LaHaye and I think it's Thomas Ice, a book of Bible charts. They're very colorful, very nice, very accurate, I think, and will serve our purposes as trying to understand the underworld, the place of the afterlife, but only in the Old Testament, only up until the time. Well, that's not exactly true. I'll explain how it is partially true and partially not true. So actually, the title of this chart is Satan, his past, present, and future. And here he is in Ezekiel 28:14, assaulting the throne of the triune God in the third heaven, the place where God lives. And of course, he's defeated and cast down to the earth, and he shows up in the Garden of Eden. But then he comes into action with the story of the sons of God in Genesis 6. It's a fascinating story. If you're not familiar with it, I encourage you to look at our video on Genesis chapter 6, and we'll talk about the sons of God intermarrying with the daughters of men and producing a race of giants, or in Hebrew, Nephilim. And then Satan gets busy also in the story of the Tower of Babel and in the testing of Job by making him sick. He's also at work in Pharaoh resisting the gospel proclamation and the command to let God's people go. He also comes down to give Yeshua, Jesus, a hard time. Goes back up to Satan's kingdom here, and we'll talk about that in a few minutes. Then the demonic seducing spirits during the church age. We fight them all the time. He will also be busy in the Great Tribulation period, kind of inhabiting and influencing the beast or the Antichrist. And then at the second coming of Christ, Antichrist is defeated. Satan is also defeated and sent to the lake of fire. Now, a couple of compartments in Sheol, or the underworld, is a place called Tartarus. I think it's only mentioned by name in either 2 Peter 2 or Jude 6. These are very similar passages and give us all the detail that we know about Tartarus. But this is a unique compartment, I guess we would call it, in the underworld. And it is the prison of fallen angels. And notice that the line connects them with Genesis 6, where that intermarriage of the sons of God, fallen angels, and human women that produce the race of Nephilim. Those fallen angels, apparently after this incident of creating kind of a mixed race of humans and angels, both before and after the flood, apparently those fallen angels were judged and sent to this unique place only for those kinds of fallen angels who the Bible said left their habitation and intermarried with women and so forth. So that's a special compartment. This is one of the compartments that I believe Yeshua descended to after his death on the cross. I believe he descended into Sheol, probably to pronounce judgment on these people. Then we have the lake of fire, which is the eternal destination of Satan, other fallen angels, the Antichrist. In fact, Tartarus may empty its residents into the lake of fire. It's kind of the final destination. Then we get to the interesting part of this. Sheol in the underworld involves two compartments. One is called Paradise, which is the residence of the righteous dead, the believers, after their earthly death during the Old Testament period. Then we have hell, which some people call torments because of the story in Luke 16 about the rich man and Lazarus. The rich man was an unbeliever and he went to this compartment. But he says, at least in the King James Version, like, here I am in torment. So this is the place of torments. That's what I prefer to call it rather than hell, because hell is more of an inclusive word that includes all three of these. And then between these two, between the believers and the unbelievers in the underworld, is a great gulf or a chasm called the bottomless pit. And Tim LaHaye believes that it is out of that pit that this seven-headed, 10-horned beast will emerge on the earth during the days of the Great Tribulation. And he's got an arrow going this way too, so maybe at the end of the millennial kingdom as well. And of course, in the story of the rich man and Lazarus, people on this side can't cross over to this side. Why would they want to? Maybe to help people who are suffering over there. And of course, people who are on the torment side cannot cross over too. So there is a fixed gulf between the two that separates the two. But yet they can see across the gulf, they just can't cross it. Now, because this is called paradise, when Yeshua was on the cross, suffering torment there on the cross, one of the criminals who was executed with him said, "Lord, remember me when you come into your kingdom." And Yeshua's response was, "Today, that is the day of both of their deaths," he said, "you will be with me in paradise." He wasn't talking about the third heaven where God lives. He was talking about paradise in the underworld, where Yeshua would descend. We've already said he went here to Tartarus to proclaim a message of victory to these fallen angels. In other words, to kind of make them grieve over the fact that their attempt to foil the plan of God to redeem mankind did not work. The Messiah had come. It was not prevented by the intermarriage of fallen angels and human women. So they lose, and they will regret that for eternity. But he also descended into this side, paradise, the abode of the righteous dead after they've died physically. And according to Ephesians 4, he led the captives who were here to their new home in the third heaven, which in 2 Corinthians 12 is called it's called the third heaven and also paradise, because now paradise is not in the underworld, it's in the third heaven. Now, I know this might be a little bit confusing, but if it is confusing to you, I encourage you to get my book, Nazarene Essene Theology, and read the portion on Sheol, where it describes in probably too much detail all the things that I'm talking about here. Now, I said that the word Sheol in the New King James Version, at least in this context, is translated wrongly because it's called the grave. Yaakov is going to say, if I lose my son Benjamin to some catastrophe, like I've already lost a couple of sons, my old gray head will descend in mourning and frustration and depression and everything into Sheol. And it's translated the grave. So in other words, I'll take my grief to the grave. Well, in the Bible, there is a different word for grave. It is kavar, and Sheol is never, I'll be bold to say, Sheol is never used in the Bible with reference to the grave. Kavar is always used. In the New Testament, it's something about memories or something like that. I would have to look it up in the Greek. I'm not that good in the Greek. But there's a Mene something. Check it out yourself. Look it up in Strong's Concordance or something. And you'll see that there's a unique word for the grave in the New Testament also. So Sheol is never a reference to the grave. And this is not just biblical trivia. because there are certain passages where life after death in the underworld in Sheol is described, like in the story of Jonah. According to the Bible, according to the book of Jonah, Jonah did not survive. He did not stay physically alive for 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, but he went to Sheol. And then after he was in Sheol for the remainder of the 3 days and 3 nights, then of course his body was still in the great fish. God put his stolen spirit back into that dead body, brought it back to life, and Jonah was expelled onto the dry land to continue his mission for God. So that's a little description of Sheol, the underworld. So the patriarchs have passed away. In chapter 42, Abraham has passed away a long time ago. And in Luke 16, the story of the rich man and Lazarus, Lazarus, the poor beggar who was a believer, went to the bosom of Abraham. So he was with Abraham in the underworld in paradise. But since Jesus led the people out of paradise, who were waiting for him to do so, and he led them to the third heaven, the Father's house with many mansions, now there is no paradise in the underworld. Now, when we die physically, we go straight to the third heaven, straight to the Father's house with many mansions. We do not pass go. We do not collect $200. We just wake up there in a delightful place. So in the Bible, there are 3 heavens discussed. This one is labeled in the Bible as the third heaven. It's the place where God lives, Father's house with many mansions. So we know about that one. There is also the atmosphere around the earth, which is the first heaven. And then there is a place called the heavenly places. That seems to be Satan's kingdom. The texts of those scriptures identify this region that's in the blue here as the realm of fallen angels and probably holy angels too. Holy angels, I think, get to be with God in the third heaven, but they are probably able to operate in the, I guess this would be called the heavenly places. Maybe the second heaven, outer space, the planets. It's usually associated, stars and planets and so forth. It's usually associated with. But there is this place called the heavenly places, evil powers in the heavenly places. This seems to be the realm of angels. Now, what we don't know is how close this heavenly places realm is to the earth. It may be you may be able to stick your hand up in the air and touch the second or even the third heaven, or the heavenly places in the third heaven may be light years away. We just don't know. The third heaven, we know, is a spiritual realm. It just means that it's not part of the material universe. Or if it is part of the material universe, it is invisible to the earthly, unresurrected, I guess, eyes, unless God opens those eyes and allows you to perceive it. So we don't know exactly how high above the earth these heavenly places in the third heaven are, but this is definitely a realm of fallen angels, maybe also holy angels. The third heaven is the place where God lives, where the holy angels live, and now it is populated by redeemed people. Yeshua has been resurrected. The Old Testament saints may have been resurrected and abiding here in resurrection bodies. We are awaiting our resurrection. If we die before the day of Christ's return and the resurrection of the righteous dead via the rapture of the church or the numerous resurrections that take place throughout the Great Tribulation period, including the end where the martyrs of that 7-year period of judgment are resurrected. If we die before any of those groups are resurrected, then we go to the third heaven, Father's house with many mansions, in a spiritual body. It's a real body, but it's not made out of material stuff. When we die physically, our body goes into the grave, the kevar, and our soul and spirit go to heaven to be with God. Now, when the day of resurrection takes place, then our mortal bodies will be united with our eternal souls and spirits, and our once mortal bodies will be converted to eternal resurrection bodies like that of Jesus, and we will live in his presence forever. Now, in the second coming, the risen Yeshua comes to the earth, specifically the Mount of Olives. We will be coming with him in our resurrection body to fight as kind of God's heavenly army against the Antichrist and all the evil people, the wicked fallen angels and so forth. So we will spend some time during the millennial kingdom on the earth with Yeshua, with the other persons of the Trinity, and then afterwards is the eternal perfect state, and we will have eternal perfect bodies to endure eternity, not to endure eternity, to enjoy eternity. And of course, even the people in the lake of fire will be resurrected in the great white throne judgment in Revelation chapter 20. So they will be resurrected, but they will be kept separate from the holy God for all eternity. And probably their greatest punishment will be the regret that they did not receive Yeshua Jesus as their Lord and Savior. So that's a little teaching on life after death, on the three heavens, on the resurrection, and so forth. So I think it is time, 26 minutes into this video, for us to get to our text for today. So here we are. Actually, we're going to do a few verses from Genesis 41, beginning with chapter 56, just to provide us with a little background and to remind us that in chapter 41, Yosef had been in prison. He was brought out of prison to become, you might call him like the prime minister of Egypt. He was the number 2 man to Pharaoh, the king of Egypt. And he had predicted in his dreams that there would be 7 years of plenty, during which time he oversaw the collection and storage of enough grain to survive the following 7 years of famine. And we're told in verse 56 that the famine during those 7 bad years was over all the face of the earth. Now, in Dake's study Bible, and I think he's probably right about this, all the face of the earth probably did not include like the Western hemisphere of North, Central, and South America, but just the territories around. It must be understood in a limited sense as when we say the whole city or everybody in the country, referring to a great crowd. These are examples of synecdoche, which is a figure of speech wherein only a part, when the whole is used and only a part is meant. So he talks about this, all the face of the earth is the countries around Egypt, which is the, what does he say here? All the land surrounding Egypt, which was the center of civilization at that time. Now, it is possible that it included, all the continents on the earth, but I doubt that. I think Dake is right here. So let's see here. I think I went backwards a little bit. So let me pick up where we left off. Famine was over the face of all the face of the earth, and Yosef opened all the storehouses and sold to the Egyptians, and the famine became severe in the land of Egypt. But then in the next verse, it says, so all countries came to Yosef in Egypt to buy grain because the famine was severe in all lands. So going back to Dake's interpretation on this, if all the countries, including North, Central, and South America, came here, they would have had to cross a great and mighty ocean. either the Atlantic or the Pacific, and either one of those would be a trial to people in this era of human history. But while I suppose it is possible, it's not probable. So this is the surrounding area. So Genesis 42:1, when Yaakov saw that there was grain in Egypt, Yaakov said to his sons, why do you look at one another? Well, how did he see the grain? He probably got some kind of a news report, travelers passing through on their way from Egypt, saying, oh, there's all this grain is available down in Egypt. So, whoever goes down there to buy it can perhaps survive this severe famine. So he just it's to be aware. He didn't necessarily see it with his own eyes. Um, so he says, boys, why are you looking at each other? There's food to be had down in Egypt, so get on going down there, and then maybe we could survive this famine. And he said, and indeed I have heard. Here it says heard, shama, rather than see, that there is grain in Egypt. Go down to that place and buy for us there, that we may live and not die. Now, one of the reasons that Egypt did better in general times of famine is because the Nile River, during times of drought, the Nile River provided irrigation for territories that weren't getting sufficient rainfall. But this is more severe than that. This is 7 straight years of famine, probably caused by drought. So even Egypt, despite the Nile River being there, was still suffering. But because Yosef had wisely managed the grain supply during the 7 years of prosperity, now there's plenty of grain stored up that this generation of people could live and not starve to death. So Yosef's 10 brothers went down to buy grain in Egypt. So why 10 rather than 12? Well, Benjamin stayed behind because Yaakov didn't want any misfortune to befall him. I think he was probably aware that Yosef was known to his brothers as his own favored son, coat of many colors and all that. And look what happened to Yosef. So now Benjamin is probably his remaining favorite son, and he doesn't want anything bad to happen to Benjamin as well. And of course, Yaakov doesn't know that Yosef is alive. So Yosef is in Egypt, Benjamin is with Yaakov, and the 10 remaining brothers go down to Egypt. But Yaakov did not send Yosef's brother Benjamin with his brothers, for he said, lest some calamity fall him, some ason, some harm. And who can blame him? Harm befell Yosef. So, why wouldn't he suspect that maybe some harm would be done to Benjamin? Now, what was the story that the other brothers gave Yaakov for the supposed death of Yosef? Well, they dipped Yosef's coat of many colors in a container of blood from that some animal that they had butchered had shed. So his coat was covered in blood, and they probably kind of ripped it up some, like it had been torn to pieces by a wild animal. So that's what Yaakov is thinking, that he was killed by a wild animal. He doesn't seem to be blaming the other brothers for the catastrophe that befell his favorite son, Yosef. Verse 5, and the sons of Israel went to buy grain among those who journeyed. The word grain is actually not in the Hebrew text. It says, V'yavou, they went, Bnei Israel, descendants of Israel. Nowadays, we would use that for all Israelites, but in those days, it's the 12 sons of Israel. Lishbor. Shabor is, as a verb, it means to buy, but shabor is food. So to buy food. And we know from the texts that have gone before that what was stored up was grain, some kind of grain, probably wheat, but possibly some other kinds of grain as well. So they went to buy, to shabar, grain among those who journeyed. So they weren't the only ones on the way. There were probably caravans of people on the way to Egypt to try to survive the famine, for the famine was in the land of Canaan. Later, it would be called the land of Israel. Now it's called the land of Canaan because the Canaanites are living there in their various tribes of the Perizzites and the Hittites and whoever else was living there. Verse 6, now Yosef was governor over the land. Governor is the word shalit in Hebrew, which is just a general word for a ruler. Governor is like in America, it's the chief executive of a state, but on the chain of command, he would be underneath the president of the United States. Although, you know, the way the U.S. Constitution is arranged, the president of the United States is the chief servant of all the states and the populations of those states. So he's governor. He's number two. Like I said, we could call him prime minister or something. The Hebrew Bible calls him shalit, hashalit. He was over the land. So his his territory, his authority extended over the land, and it was he who sold to all the people of the land. And Joseph's brothers came and bowed down before him with their faces to the earth. Now, if you remember the dreams that Joseph had, he dreamed of, what was it, stalks of wheat, and then there was another dream with the sun, moon, and stars, and what was it? The sun, the moon, and 12 stars, I think, something like that. And the gist of the dreams was that his brothers would bow down to him. And of course, that offended them greatly, but here they are bowing down to him. So Yosef had a dream, and it has literally come true. So verse 7, Yosef saw his brothers. That's the regular Hebrew word ra'ah. The third letter in the root is a hey, and typically the hey drops out. So he was seeing his brothers, and he recognized them. The three-letter root of the word for recognition here, to recognize, is the word nakar. But just as a third root letter, hey, drops out, a first letter, nakar, often drops out. So in the highlighted part here, we don't see the noon in nakar. It's dropped out. And the yod here as a prefix indicates that it's he saw them, third person masculine, singular. So nakar, he recognized them. Now just keep that word nakar in mind because it will crop up again. So he saw his brothers and he recognized them, but he acted as a stranger to them. Now look at the information window at the bottom of the page, and you see that the three-letter root of the word stranger is also nakar. It's the same, it's the same word. So here we see it in the Hebrew text. We do have the nakar there that has remained in the word for stranger, and this would be a hitpael version. He made himself a stranger to them. Now, Joseph has aged considerably. What did we say? He was 17 when he was sold into slavery by his brothers, and now he's 30. So that would be what, 13 years later? Is that right? 13 years later? Yeah, 30. Yeah. So it's 13 years since they've seen him, but he is probably groomed like an Egyptian. And I don't know if that means a shaved head or, whatever the clothing styles were of the Egyptians. He's dressed like an Egyptian. He was probably in Egyptian prison garb, groomed like an Egyptian. Now he is the number two man in Egypt, so he's probably dressed in royal attire, with all kinds of headdresses and makeup or whatever they did to make an impressive representation. His brothers don't recognize him, but he recognizes them. And so he made himself a stranger to them. In other words, he hid his identity to them, and he spoke roughly to them. Kasha is the Hebrew word for harsh or hard or gruffly, something like that. He spoke gruffly to them. But then he said to them, "Where do you come from?" And they said, "From the land of Canaan, to buy food." Ochel, this is another word besides shabar for food, ochel. Um, so why is he speaking roughly to them? I think it's because he's going to test them and, kind of see what kind of characters they've developed into. Probably one of the main things on Joseph's mind is there any sorrow connected with these guys? Is there any regret that they sold their younger brother into slavery? So he's going to kind of question them and put them to the test, maybe scare them a little bit because of the harm they did to him. So Yosef recognized his brothers, Yakar from the root Nakar, his brothers, but they did not Nakar, they did not recognize him. Okay, then Yosef remembered the dreams, which we've already discussed, which he had dreamed about them, and he said to them, so he remembered those dreams, but this comment isn't connected with the dream, with the dreams he had. Like he doesn't say to them, "Here you are, bow down for me, in front of me. Does this sound familiar to you?" He's still trying to hide his identity. So he says, "You are spies." Now, the word spy is a interesting word in Hebrew. The root word, as you see in the information window at the bottom of the page, is ragal, resh, gimel, and lamed. And that's the word for foot. It's the word for a foot. Now, that's a verbal root. And if you want to turn a verbal root into a noun, one of the ways that you do it is you add a mem or an m in front of that. Now, the mem turns the verb into a noun, but the ending here is interesting. Raglim. It is a plural ending. So we have more than one foot. We have a feet. Ragalayim is the word for your 2 feet. It's not plural, but it's dual because we have 2 feet, not just one and not 3 or more. We have 2 feet, so it's a ragalayim. But when you turn this into a noun, he's talking about what, 10 brothers, and that is more than 2. So he's calling all of them meraglim, plural. So what's the connection? It's translated spies. So what's the connection between feet and spies? And I guess, I'm just supposing this, but I guess in those days, spies probably traveled on foot. We know when the Israelites during the Exodus send the 10 spies into Canaan, they go on foot. And when Joshua sends 2 spies into Jericho before the invasion, they go on foot. So I guess the typical mode of travel for spies was that they would walk to where they are. They didn't go by helicopters. They didn't go by cavalry horses, but they went by foot. So meragalim are spies, footmen. You have come to see the nakedness of the land, erva. Alum is related to this. It's the word for nakedness, but also the word for subtlety, which implies a little bit of deception and stuff like that. So so ragalaim and arava are two good words to use, because what do spies do? They disguise their identity and they pretend they're something they're not. So erva is the perfect word to use for this. And it says they wanted to see the nakedness of the land. In other words, they kind of wanted to look behind the scenes and see the thrones of power in operation, see what kind of resources are available and stuff like that. Now, he knows they're not spies, and he knows that they don't have devious intentions here, but that's what he accuses them of. He knows they're his brothers. He knows that they're hungry and they need food, but he needs to put them through this trial or test. Verse 10, and they said to him, "No, my Lord," in other words, "we're not spies, but your servants have come to buy food, to shabar." And here we have the Hebrew word shabar, which means to buy food, and okel, which is the other word. So we have a double kind of a parallel description of what they came for. We came to buy food. We want food. We are all one man's sons. We are honest men. Your servants are not spies. They they really aren't spies. They want him to know that they haven't come to spy out the land or do Egypt harm or anything like that. They're honest men, if honest men can sell their brother into slavery. But of course, the 10 are not thinking about that now. They figured Joseph is dead, or his life is just passing in misery as, some brutal master's slave. But he said to them, "No, but you have come to see the nakedness of the land." So Yosef is insisting. He's a powerful person. He's a shalit. And they said, "Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of Canaan." Now, the fact that they use the number 12, we've already been told that 10 of them made the trip, but they're talking about all the brothers, including Yosef and Benjamin, who's still at home. So that it's an accurate description of the group. Your servants are 12 brothers, the sons of one man in the land of. They all have the same father, but they don't all have the same mother. There are 4 different mothers of this group. So this is very accurate. And they live in the land of Canaan, where the tribes of Canaan are living and functioning. In fact, the youngest is with our father today. That's Benjamin. He is the youngest. And one is no more. So who's the brother, the one who is no more? They're talking about Yosef. They're talking to Yosef, but they don't know it. So verse 14, but Yosef said to them, "It is as I spoke to you, saying you are spies." So this is the 3rd time Yosef isn't listening to their excuses or their explanations. He wants them to understand that he is convinced that they are spies. He's not, of course, but he wants them to think he's convinced. "In this manner you shall be tested." Now, there are a couple of words in Hebrew for testing, and this is important for us, especially when those words are used with reference to God. One word is nasa. That would be noon. I think it's sonic or seen. Is it hey or aleph? I can't look in the information window here because that's not the word that's used. This is the word bahan. Bahan really doesn't mean to test, but it means to prove. Like, I know something about you and I'm going to prove it by whatever action is about to follow. the Bible makes it clear that God. Well, let me take a step back and say the Hebrew word nasa can be translated by two English words. One is tempt, and the other is test. Hebrew only has one word for that. Bahan is a little bit different. We'll talk about that in a moment. But nasa can mean both tempt and test. To tempt means to try to get a person to sin. So Satan is called the tempter, the nasa or Manasseh, the tempter. So he tried to get Jesus to sin. He tried to get Adam and Eve to sin. He tries to get you and me to sin. So that's Nasa. That's one example of Nasa. Nasa can also be translated as to try by means of a trial. So, in other words, God allows us to go through trials and tribulations to strengthen our faith and to test it, to see if it's legitimate or not, to see if our faith will see us through and make us stronger on the other end. So the Bible says God God never nasas people in order to get them to sin. God does not try to make you sin. He does allow you to go through trials and testings and stuff like that to test your faith. But this word bahan is a little bit different because it means to prove. Now, there's a famous passage in the book of Malachi where God says about the tithe. He says, test me in this. Bring your tithe into the storehouse and see if I don't heap abundant wealth on you in response. That word is bahan. So by, giving money to God's kingdom through the church, we're not tempting God and we're not putting him to the test, but we are proving that a principle that he has established in Malachi chapter 3, I believe it is, and many other places in the Bible where, where God says, if you're generous, I'll outgive you in return. Bahan, it just means put this spiritual principle into action and prove for yourself that it works. So Yosef says, in this manner you shall be proven. Okay, you'll be proven. You won't be tempted to sin, and you won't be put through a trial, to see if your faith will endure. But he's going to test them to prove what kind of people they are. Now, I think he's hoping that they will be good quality people with integrity and honor and stuff like that. But the Bahan may prove that they're all dirty rats. So by the life of Pharaoh, and this is kind of an Egyptian way of swearing, swearing by the king of Egypt. So I swear by the king of Egypt, you shall not leave this place unless your youngest brother comes here. So it's like Yosef is suggesting that he has some power and influence with Pharaoh. And because of his influence, here's what's going to happen. You guys are not going to leave this place until your youngest brother comes here. So the initial Bahan is this, verse 16. Send one of you, one of the 12, and let him bring your brother, and you, this is going to be a plural you, shall be kept in prison, that your words may be tested to see whether there is any, tested here, Bahan again, to see whether there is any truth in you, or else by the life of Pharaoh. Surely you are spies. And what do they do with spies? What do they still do with spies? They kill them. So the initial trial, the initial Bahan, or the initial proof, the Bahan, is going to be all 9 of those who came are going to stay, and one of them will be chosen to return to Canaan, get Benjamin and bring him back to Egypt, and the results will determine what Joseph is going to do with them. So that's the first version of the Bahan. Verse 17. So he put them all together in prison 3 days. Then Yosef said to them the third day, do this and live, for I fear God. Now, some people try to make some kind of a symbolism out of the 3 days. Um, like the 3 days that Jesus was in the grave, and so he descended into hell, then he got his resurrection body, and on the third day his tomb is found empty. I just don't uh, I don't see any spiritual thing about this. I don't think the fact that they were in prison for 3 days is indicative of physical death or resurrection or anything. I think the 3 days is just the length of the time that Joseph left them in there. Now, it may be, if you would go back to Genesis 37, um, it could be that, of course, they threw Yosef into a pit or like a dry well. He may have been in there 3 days. I don't remember. So there could be a connection with that. You put me in the pit 3 days. Now I'm going to put you in prison 3 days. I don't know how long he was in the pit. For some reason, I think it wasn't that long. Verse 18, then Yosef said to them the third day, do this and live, for I fear God. And again, because of the references to God and the third day, and do this and live, this he's talking about is what follows in verse 19 and following. So if you are honest men, what I'm saying is I don't see a spiritual connection here. It's just Yosef has given them one version of what the behind the test, the proof is going to be. Now he's going to alter it a little bit. If you are honest men, let one of your brothers be confined to your prison house, but you go and carry grain for the famine of your houses. So Yosef has a couple of things on his mind. One is to prove his brothers, to see what kind of character they have. The other is just concerned for the household because he knows how severe the famine is, and he wants his family to live. So he wants them to be successful in obtaining grain and taking it back to his father and his youngest brother. And by the way, Joseph's questioning of them and their openness in telling, their family history informs him that his father is still alive, and so is his younger brother. So, of course, Yosef and Benjamin had the same mom. That was Rachel, his father's favorite. So he keeps one of them in prison and sends the rest of them back to Canaan with all the grain that they had purchased. And bring your youngest brother to me so that your words will be verified and you shall not die. And they did so. So he is threatening the death penalty. Like if the one that gets sent back doesn't return with Benjamin, the rest of them are going to die. But now he's decided that they all get to go back, and only one of them is going to stay in prison. And if they don't return, that one is going to die probably. So verse 21, then they said to one another, we are truly guilty concerning our brother. Now, this is actually a huge response to them. Of course, they're talking to one another. They're not talking to Yosef. And they're saying, in other words, their consciences are getting the best of them. So why has this horrible thing happened to us? Maybe it's because of the way we treated our brother. So we are truly guilty. Asham in Hebrew, like you should be ashamed of yourself. So it's a reference to guilt concerning our brother, concerning Yosef. For we saw the anguish of his soul when he pleaded with us, and we would not hear. Shama, we would not listen to him. Therefore, this distress has come upon us. So people have a tendency to do this. People have a tendency to think, God is a harsh judge. And whenever anything bad happens to me, it's probably because of some sin of mine. Well, it could be, but not necessarily. You also have an enemy, Satan, and fallen angels and demons and wicked, evil people who follow Satan. And sometimes the righteous do suffer, but people have a tendency to think if something bad happens to me, it's probably because of something I did wrong. And Reuben answered them and said, Did I not speak to you, saying, Do not sin against the boy, and you would not listen? So here's the guy we all hate. We're all down in the dumps because of what's happening to us. And Reuben said, Didn't I warn you that this would happen? I gave you good advice and you didn't take it. So now we're all in a mess. And so it's your fault, but it's not my fault. Therefore, behold, his blood is now required of, he doesn't say you, even though he thinks himself less guilty than them. He says it's required of us. So you should have done what I said, but you didn't. So now we're in this mess, but he includes himself in the group. Also on the Apostle Paul's voyage to Rome, of course, there's a disastrous storm that they at sea that they get caught up in. And one of the things that Paul does, like at the low point in the journey when everybody is despairing for their life, Paul goes, I told you not to set sail on this cruise and you ignored me. So now here we are. But at least he adds that God is going to be with us and, we're all going to survive this thing. So, like, fear not. But he's that guy you hate. When the chips are down, he starts blaming others. So, verse 23, but they did not know that Yosef understood them, for he spoke to them through an interpreter. There is, the Egyptians probably spoke, well, I was going to say a Semitic language, but it probably wasn't a Semitic language. The Egyptians are descendants of Ham, of the three sons of Noah. You've got Shem, Ham, and Japhet. Japhet is the ancestor of the Europeans. Then Shem is the ancestor of the Shemites or the Semites, which would be Israel and those nations that we looked at in the PowerPoint, the Arabs, the Jordanians, the Syrians, and stuff like that. Those are all Semitic languages. But I think there was a language called Egyptian. And in fact, I think it went through phases. So at this point in history, it was probably what is called Old Egyptian. And then there was like a Middle Egyptian. And nowadays, I think the Egyptians speak Coptic. And I know in the biblical era, the Egyptian language was spelled out in Greek letters during the days of the Greek Empire. And I think the Egyptian Bibles probably used the Egyptian language, spelled it with Greek characters. And I think I think Coptic is limited to that era of Egyptian. So Joseph, of course, is going to understand Hebrew because his family was Hebrew. He would have to know the Egyptian language because he's the prime minister of Egypt. So he probably learned that language either before he went to Egypt or while he was living there. He's been there, what did we say, 13 years. So that's plenty of time to learn the language. He also may have known Aramaic or some kind of a universal language. He probably knew many foreign languages because as the prime minister, he would have dealings with people from many nations. So he was multilingual, I'm pretty sure. He is not speaking to them in Hebrew because he doesn't want them to know he's their brother. So he's probably speaking to them in Egyptian and using an interpreter, perhaps to translate into Hebrew so they can understand, or maybe they already understand Egyptian. So he spoke to them through an interpreter, probably in Joseph speaking Egyptian, and then the interpreter translating it into Hebrew for them. Now, he could speak to them in Hebrew, but that would give away his identity. So he turned himself away from them and wept. So this is a very emotional experience for Yosef. His brothers treated him very badly. but he sees them. I think he loves them. He's probably very grieved over the harm that they have caused him in his life. But I think he loves them as family members. Of course, he dearly loves his brother Benjamin, who I doubt was in any way involved in the selling of him to the Ishmaelites or the Midianites. So yeah, this is a very emotional time for them. So he turned himself away from them and he wept. Then, like once he got himself back under control, he returned to them again and talked with them, and he took Shimon from them and bound him before their eyes. Now, one of the things that Dake says about this verse is that he took Shimon because of his cruel nature. Genesis 34:25 is the story of Shimon and Levi taking vengeance on the city of Shechem and killing all the residents there because Dinah had been taken and molested and so forth. So Shimon was a vengeful person and was evidently one of the one most responsible for Joseph's sufferings. I don't know where the Bible says that, but that is Dake's persuasion. He may have been the one who bound Yosef and cast him into a pit. If that's true, Shimon is going to be bound. So what? An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He was left bound. Hence, he was left bound while the others were back in Canaan. So he took Shimon from them and bound him before their eyes. He wanted them to see that he was going to bind their brother and put him in prison. Then Yosef gave the command to fill their sacks with grain, to restore every man's money to his sack, and to give them provisions for the journey. So three things he commands. One is to fill their sacks with grain. They paid their money, they should get their grain. He also commands them, number two, to restore every man's money to his sack. Dake suggests that, perhaps he was concerned that his brothers would not have enough money to provide grain for the family, and he wants the family to survive. So he puts their money back in their sacks and to give them provisions for the journey, which would probably be, some food and water just for them during their travels. Thus he did for them. Now, I believe the text indicates that one of the brothers got his money put back into the sack of grain towards the top, and all the rest of them got their money bags put in their sack of grain, but towards the bottom. So as we go through the next verses, see if you agree with me or not. So verse 26, so they loaded their donkeys with the grain and departed from Egypt. But as one of them, and I don't know if that one is named or it needs to be named, one of them opened his sack to give his donkey feed at the encampment. So he would have taken some grain out of the top of the grain sack to give to his donkey, but he saw his money. So this was the one whose money was at the top of the sack. Now, they all probably did the same thing, but this one was the only one who saw his money bag at the top of his bag. The rest of them didn't dig through to the bottom. And there it was in the mouth of his sack. So we know that money bag was towards the top of the sack. So he said to his brothers, my money has been restored, and there it is in my sack. Now, one reaction they could have is, well, God be praised. We brought money to buy this grain. We bought some grain, and God has miraculously restored our money to us. But they don't seem to take it that way. Then their hearts failed them, and they were afraid, saying to one another, what is this that God has done to us? So again, people have a tendency when times are tough, and times are tough for them now, they blame God for it, or they're at least they don't blame God for it. They are blaming themselves for it, but they think God is judging them for their previous actions with Joseph. So, why are they so upset about this? Because they're afraid they will be considered thieves. Joseph's already accused them of being spies. They're leaving Egypt with sacks of grain, but their money is still in the sacks of grain. And they could say, well, we didn't put them there. But Egypt apparently did not get the purchase price for this grain. So now they can be accused of being thieves as well as spies. Verse 29. Then they went to Yaakov, their father, in the land of Canaan, and told him all that had happened to them, saying, the man who was Lord of the land spoke roughly to us. Here we have kasha again, harshly or roughly or derogatorily. And he took us for spies, meragalim, of the country, of the Eretz, the land. The word for Lord here is interesting because it's Adonai. And actually, the word Adonai is plural, just like Elohim is plural. And when we look at the word Elohim from a Christian perspective, we say, well, that makes sense because although there's one Godhead, there are three persons in the Godhead, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So that's why the word Elohim is plural. Well, the same thing is true of Adonai. Um, so what? Adonim would be plural. Adonai with a batah and a yod is also plural. And when applied to the one true God of the Bible, that makes sense. So not only is Elohim God plural, but Adonai Lord is plural. But here it's being used with reference to Yosef. So, so why is it being used as a plural here? It could be used as a plural because the brothers are saying that Yosef is a shalit, but he's one of many in the land. So the Pharaoh undoubtedly has other governors or ministers working for him, and Joseph is just one of them. That would be a literal kind of a thing. So I guess I would expect this to be, it is in the construct case, meaning lords of the land. But I would expect it, in reference to Joseph, I would expect it to be a singular construct, Lord of the land. But it's not, it's in the plural. And maybe Adonai just comes off that way. Maybe it's a plural implying singular. But I'm not sure what to make of that. So verse 31, we said to him, the brothers are saying, we said to him, to Yosef, although they don't know it's Yosef, we are honest men, we are not spies. And they did say that, you recall. Verse 32, we are 12 brothers, the sons of our father, and one is no more, and the youngest is with our father this day in the land of Canaan. So they're just repeating the dialogue that they had with Yosef earlier. Verse 33, then the man, the Lord of the country, said to us, and here again, we have it in the plural. It's a plural construct, Adonai, of the country, said to us, by this I will know. Here he doesn't use the word bahan, but he uses the word edah, so that would be kind of a future. It's a imperfect first common singular of the verb yada with an ein on the, I'm sorry, with a yod as the first first root letter. You are, but I will know that you are honest men. Leave one of your brothers here with me. Take food for the famine of your households, and be gone. And Shimon was the one that got left behind. And bring your youngest brother to me, so that I shall know that you are not spies, but that you are honest men. What is the word for honest here? Let's see, honest. Kanim, well-established men, kind of upright and honest, well-established. I will grant your brother to you, and you may trade in the land. So if you guys come back with Benjamin, then I'll know you're legit, and you can come back as often as you need to buy grain or whatever you want to, whatever kind of business you want to do in the land. Everything will be hunky-dory. Then it happened as they emptied their sacks that surprisingly each man's bundle of money was in his sack. So they emptied their sacks. It wasn't until they emptied their sacks, like maybe dumped all the grain in their sacks out of the sacks into a big storage container or something like that. But that's when the rest of them discover that their money is there. And when they saw and when they saw I'm sorry. And when they and their father saw the bundles of money, they were afraid. Because, like we said before, now they can be considered thieves. And Yaakov said to their father, I'm sorry. And Yaakov, their father, said to them, "You have bereaved me. Yosef is no more." He's convinced that Yosef was killed by a wild animal. He doesn't know that they sold their brother into slavery. Shimon is no more. And the way this is described in Hebrew here, let me go a little higher here. Let's see. Yosef einenu. Yosef, he is not. That's what it literally says. And Shimon einenu. He is not. So he is no more. So the word more is in italics because more, yoter, or meod is not in the Hebrew text. And you want to take Benjamin. All these things are against me. So Yaakov feels like his life is just going from bad to worse. He's already lost one of his sons, his favorite one. Now he's lost Shimon. What if something bad happens to Benjamin? It's almost more than he can bear. Then Reuben spoke to his father, saying, "Kill my two sons if I do not bring him back to you." And he's not saying kill them today. He's saying, I will leave my two sons in your custody and take Benjamin down to Egypt. And if I don't return to him with the grain that we want, then you have permission to kill my sons. That's how warped and corrupt this family is. So the only thing he can think of for collateral is to give his two sons into the hands of his own father, and that his father would kill him, or would kill those two young boys. So again, it's not only a dysfunctional family, but it's a morally warped and corrupt family. Kill my two sons if I do not bring him, Benjamin, back to you. Put him in my hands, and I will bring him back to you. But he said, my son shall not go down with you, for his brother is dead, and he is left alone. If any calamity should befall him along the way in which you go, then you would bring down my gray hair with sorrow. Yagon. To the grave is wrong. It's Sheol, to the underworld. Now, Yaakov is a believer, so he would go to the paradise part. In the preliminary material from my PowerPoint, we did a commentary on a slide right towards the end about Sheol, paradise, torments, Tartarus, the lake of fire, hell, whatever you want to call that. We talk about that and the three heavens. So if you missed out on the preliminary material, you may want to rewind until you see a slide in my slideshow called Satan something or other. And, it shows the third heaven, the heavenly places beneath that, the atmosphere around the earth, the grave, and the underworld. And we did a little discourse on that. So that brings us to the end of chapter 42. That's where we'll call it quits tonight. I'm going to give you a New Testament blessing just because I feel like it. So the grace of our Lord Jesus Christ, Yeshua HaMashiach, the love of God the Father, and the fellowship or the communion of the Ruach HaKodesh, the Holy Spirit, be with you all. And I hope we will see you in the next video of chapter 43. Shalom.